What's up, Psychedelic Spotlight? In today's decriminalization update, we're going to be looking at some pretty major pieces of legislation in states such as Maine, Oklahoma, and Colorado, as well as taking a look at some negative news on the federal level and some positive news in the Great White North. But first, let me introduce you to today's video's sponsor, the like button. Psychedelic Spotlight, sponsored by the like button. If you enjoy what we do, go ahead and smash that like button to ensure you see more of it. Alright, jumping right into today's events, we're going to start by looking at the Pine Tree State, perhaps better known as Maine. On Tuesday, there was a hearing in their legislature on a bill that would, quote, establish a legal framework for psilocybin-assisted therapy for people over the age of 21. So this bill is actually very similar to Oregon's bill, which was passed in 2020. However, that one was voted on by the populace. Essentially, what this bill will do is add psilocybin to the state's marijuana bill. This will mean that it will legalize the production of psilocybin, however, only in licensed facilities. It would also legalize taking psilocybin in psilocybin service centers and under the supervision of 2 licensed facilitators. So just to be abundantly clear, this bill would not legalize psilocybin for home use. If you wanted to take it, you would have to go to a psilocybin service center and take the psilocybin under the supervision of therapists. However, and this is important, at the moment, there is no requirement that you have a doctor's note for some sort of serious mental health condition such as depression, PTSD, anxiety, etc. In theory, as the bill stands now, anybody would be able to do this. Now, quote, patients would have to participate in a preparation session with a counselor to set goals and expectations, and they would be offered 2 implementation sessions to help process and integrate their experience into their lives. So again, as we always talk about, a psychedelic experience isn't a one-day event, it's a full ritual, and in a therapy setting, you need to have your preparation sessions, the psilocybin session, and crucially, the integration session, and this bill does account for all of that. The bill's sponsor is Democratic Senator Donna Bailey, and she says that she believes that her colleagues are open to the idea. However, there may be some disagreements on the scope and scale of it and how soon the program will be implemented. She says, quote, I have heard from so many folks from across the state saying they're waiting anxiously to try this or they have used it in other places and how tremendously it has helped them. I really believe we need to put forward the framework to allow the folks in Maine to be able to benefit. But real talk here for a second, just how likely is this bill to pass in the first place? Well, to be fair, it is in the very beginning stages and anything could happen, so we're just going to have to wait and see. However, if it does ultimately get passed, we're likely going to see dozens of changes to try to get enough lawmakers on board to get that 50+1 that is needed in order to pass a bill. And to be abundantly clear, there are absolutely no guarantees this bill will pass. However, it is likely, if it does eventually pass, that it will end up being limited in scope and scale somewhat. Perhaps they will make it necessary that if you want to get this treatment, you will need to be referred by a doctor for something like depression or PTSD. However, that is just my own speculation. Again, it is too early to tell, and frankly, I would still support the bill if that were to happen. I definitely support it now. This would legalize psilocybin therapy for everybody. That would be absolutely amazing, but even if it got limited to just those who need it for depression, for anxiety, for PTSD, what have you, I would still be very much on board. So a huge props, a huge shout out to Senator Donna Bailey in the state of Maine. Moving on, next up we're going to be moving to the Sooner State, perhaps better known as Oklahoma. There we have 2 separate bills to talk about put forward by members of the GOP, the Grand Old Party, the Republican Party. And these bills would promote the research of psilocybin in clinical trials. The 2 bills' sponsors are Representative Daniel Pay and Logan Phillips. Both bills would aim to study psilocybin's effectiveness in treating conditions such as treatment-resistant depression, such as brain injuries, such as PTSD, etc., and both bills specifically target veterans as the people that they want to help, because after all, that is about as bipartisan of an issue as you can get. who doesn't want to help the veterans? And while both bills are genuinely amazing and I would support either one of them, it must be said that Representative Pay's bill is better because, frankly, it goes much farther. Not only does it promote the research of psilocybin, which is absolutely fantastic, but it also calls for the decriminalization of psilocybin for personal use. And this is so important because the war on drugs has failed. So instead of going to jail for basically the rest of your entire adult life, if caught with psilocybin, if caught with magic mushrooms, instead you would only get a $400 fine. And I know a $400 fine still sucks. There is a saying that if the punishment for a crime is just a fine, then the law only applies to poor people. And while this is certainly very true, at the end of the day, it is still such a huge step up, such a huge improvement from 20 plus years in jail for possession of psilocybin. So I support this bill wholeheartedly, even if it isn't necessarily perfect. And again, I do support both of these bills. Hopefully they get merged into one super bill that has both the studying aspect and the decriminalization aspect. The last thing that I want to point out here on these Oklahoma bills is something that's super important in the psychedelics industry, and that is bipartisanship. You'll notice that in the Maine bill, it was a Democrat that was putting this bill forward. And in both of these Oklahoma bills, they're Republicans. In today's hyper-partisan times, it is so important that we still have issues that we can reach across the aisle and agree upon. And helping people with PTSD, helping people with severe anxiety ought to be one of those issues. So if the science is there and the science is saying that these people can be helped, well then it is heartening to see that we have politicians on both sides of the aisles willing to take this issue up. The last state that we're going to be looking at today is the Centennial State, known as Colorado. Here, a bill has been filed to commission a year-long study into the effectiveness of plant-based medicines such as psilocybin, even though technically psilocybin comes from a fungi, not a plant. Anyhow, always gets on my nerves when we call it plant-based medicines, but whatever, getting on a tangent. A bill has been filed to commission a year-long study into the effectiveness of plant-based medicines to support mental health care treatments. Quote, House Bill 1116 would establish a review panel to study the healing effects of DMT, ibogaine, and magic mushroom ingredients psilocybin and psilocin before making policy recommendations to the governor and the Colorado General Assembly. This panel would be, quote, tasked with not only exploring a statewide rescheduling and decriminalization of psychedelics, but also looking into production and distribution of the plant medicine, as well as determining dosage guidelines in the treatment of mental health issues. So, to be completely clear and transparent, this bill would not, right off the bat, legalize psilocybin. It would not legalize any sort of psychedelic. However, what it would do is move us a step in the right direction. This panel that it is establishing, or would establish, would be specifically to look at how to decriminalize and how to regulate these markets. So this is a very good bill, even if it is a somewhat conservative one in the sense that it is moving slowly. Now, also, staying in Colorado at the same time as this bill is being debated by the politicians, the people have said that they've had enough and they're going to take it directly to the voters. So as you guys may already know, there are actually 2 ballot initiatives in the state of Colorado right now regarding the legalization of psychedelics. And both of them have been recently modified somewhat rather. So let's just take a moment to discuss what each of these ballot initiatives will do. The first one will just legalize psilocybin for use in treatment centers, so very similar to what we just discussed happening in Maine and in Oregon. This would only be psilocybin, however, it could expand to other substances by 2026 if the research comes in positively. So at the end of the day, this ballot initiative, which people may get the right to vote on in November, would legalize psilocybin within these treatment centers. The second ballot initiative is much more expansive. This one would legalize the personal use of psilocybin, ibogaine, mescaline, and DMT. So this is obviously much more expansive, much more holistic, and I mean, honestly, I like them both. I don't know which one I personally like more. I think both are extremely important. I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for deciding to put a non-dangerous substance in their body, but I also think that people should be able to visit treatment centers and get the help that they need. So if both of these bills pass, then absolutely great. I'm not exactly 100% sure if we will get the chance to vote on both of them or whether they will be combined into one proposal by the time we get around to November, and then people will just vote on that one proposal. But either way, I would be extremely happy with either, because the people have had enough with these drug wars. We saw it in Oregon when they voted overwhelmingly to legalize psilocybin in these treatment centers, and they're tired of politicians dragging their feet on ending the drug war. So when we put these questions directly to the voters, they're more likely to happen. So out of everything that we've talked about today, all 3 states, the most likely aspect to actually get passed, I would guess, are these ballot initiatives, which again, the people of Colorado will get the chance to vote on in November. The last thing that we have to look at here in the United States is a lot more negative, and we're going to shift from a state level to the federal level. And while many federal bureaucracies such as the FDA have been jumping on board with the use of psilocybin, the use of psychedelics as medicines, for instance, the FDA gave breakthrough status to both MDMA and psilocybin, apparently other departments haven't got the memo. And I'm saying this because the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, has just announced that they're adding 5 more psychedelics to the Schedule 1 list. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Schedule 1 means the most illegal. Adding these psychedelics to Schedule 1 will, quote, not just ban the possession, distribution, import, export, and manufacturing, but will also ban the research, instructional activities, and chemical analysis. Apparently, guys, these psychedelics, they're so dangerous, scientists aren't even allowed to study the chemical analysis or to run chemical analyses on these substances. So apparently these are just really scary drugs, guys. And these 5 drugs are going to be joining psilocybin, LSD, DMT, mescaline, and more in the Schedule 1 category. Now, as I'm sure most of you guys are already aware, there is research happening on Schedule 1 drugs, such as LSD, such as MDMA, such as psilocybin, so the door isn't shutting on these 5 substances all the way, 100%. It's still open a crack. You can still get a toe in there if you want, go through all the paperwork, get the approval from the 112 different government agencies you need to. So it's not a complete endgame for these substances, but it is still extremely discouraging that as the public is screaming, we want the drug war to end, the DEA just isn't seeming to get the message, and they're apparently going to add 5 more to the absolute absurd Category 1. Now, to be clear, the 5 psychedelics in question are relatively obscure, and to be truthful, I've literally never even heard of any of them before. So I'll just go ahead and read off what they are for you. They are 4-OH-DIPT, 5-MeO-AMT, 5-MeO-MIPT, 5-MeO-DET, and DIPT. And according to the DEA, these 5 tryptamines have no known medical use in the United States and are not marketed internationally as approved drugs. They have been reported as drugs of abuse in the US by law enforcement authorities and identified in seizures. And the DEA also claims that there have been many instances of death that have been recorded in those that have used these substances. So obviously that sounds scary. Nobody likes death. But then on the flip side, let's take a listen to the CEO of Panacea Plant Sciences, David Heldreth, who argues that, quote, deaths attributed to these compounds have only occurred with comorbid use of psychiatric medications along with alcohol and the identified tryptamines. So in other words, literally every single person that the DEA said died from these substances also had psychiatric medications and alcohol in their system. And guys, the combination of psychiatric medicines and alcohol can kill you on their own. So there is absolutely no indication that it had anything to do with these 5 psychedelics. Continuing with this quote, as such, it is likely that these deaths have very little to do with the tryptamines alone and are either directly due to the use of alcohol and psychiatric medications, which present a known danger, or from the combination of those items with the drugs. So, guys, like I said, I don't know too much about these specific drugs, but I do know the drug war, it has failed miserably. And there is no way in hell that these drugs are dangerous enough to even ban scientists from researching them. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that if perhaps there was solid evidence that these 5 psychedelics did cause bodily harm to lots of people, either to those taking it or those around them, that some restrictions wouldn't be warranted. What I am saying is 2 things. First, they have to have real proof that that has actually happened, which it appears they have none. And second, even if they did have this solid proof, let's give them the benefit of the doubt for a second. Schedule 1 still makes absolutely no sense. Banning scientists from doing chemical analyses on these drugs? It's absurd, guys, and honestly, Schedule 1 in general does not make any sense to me whatsoever. Maybe it could be useful for, say, chemical weapons like an anthrax bomb or something. Okay, maybe we should limit scientists being able to study that. But for LSD, DMT, are you joking? I would just scrap Schedule 1 altogether, maybe with, again, the exception of bioweapons or something. Literally, Schedule 1 makes no sense to me. But luckily, there is still some time for us to make a difference here, to make sure the DEA doesn't actually do this. Because the DEA is actually holding a public consultation period that will end on a very special day, February 14th, and no, it's not a special day because it's the day of Bound Chicka Wow Wow. It is also a very special birthday. So if you enjoy this show and you enjoy the content that I bring towards you, please give me a great birthday gift by making your voice heard. Fill out this form that I'm putting on your screen now. I will put the link in the description. Let the DEA know that you are not okay with them continuing the drug war, and we should be moving in the opposite direction. So if this matters to you, make sure you vote. You have until February 14th. On one last note, a little bit more positive news up in my home and native land, Canada. There is a bill in front of Parliament which is set to be debated on, which would decriminalize all drugs. However, I just want to be very clear right off the bat, this isn't likely to pass. This is a private member's bill, and without getting too into the weeds of how Canadian politics works, basically some random MP from a minority party, the NDP, got the chance to put this member before Parliament, so that's what's happening. The NDP has thrown their weight to some extent behind this bill. But since they are not in government, the Liberal Party has a government, they have a minority government, they would need the support of the Liberals to get this bill passed, and the Liberals have said in the past they're not super open to the idea of decriminalization. However, they do have a minority government, so if the NDP really wanted to throw their weight around, they could say, we're not going to support the rest of your agenda unless you support this decriminalization of all drugs. Are they going to do that? Probably not. They've probably got bigger fish to fry. They probably have more expansive economic things that they want to get passed instead. But nevertheless, there is a bill in front of Parliament in Canada right now that would decriminalize all drugs. So if you're Canadian like me and this is an issue that you care about, you can always write your MPs. We live in a democracy. Make your voice heard. Alright guys, that is it for today. Once again, today's sponsor is the like button. Go ahead and smash it. Until next time.